Impact and popularity of foreign films in India is a tricky and intriguing subject, both at the same time. Intriguing because it has to be admitted, it's a historical fact that in India, film began under European and foreign influence. Lumiere brothers showed their films on 1896 in the month of July, and after that a group of people began to shoot their own items and these were projected on screen. We all know that both Hiralal Sen and D.G. Phalke were influenced by foreign outputs. Hiralal Sen had access to silent European cinema by courtesy Pathé brothers when they exhibited their films on Calcutta Maidan in 1898, and D.G. Phalke was highly impressed with the life of Christ in 1912, so much so that he went to England all the way to buy a camera, came back and shot Raja Harishchandra, India's first feature film. Indian films were influenced by European cinema, got impetus and cast its spell over us. But the point is that there are two aspects of the problem, one an intellectual one and the other a popular one. About the intellectual one, we can have a direct entry. Let us say the story of neorealism. It initiated a modern kind of realism in Indian cinema. Both Do Bigha Jamin and Pather Pachali learned their primary lessons from the neorealist experimentations. And after that, many films, say La Dolce Vita, influenced Ritik Ghatak's Subarnalekha like anything, and we got our primary lessons from Antonioni's silence in La Ventura, in La Notte and L'Eclisse. The discussion can go on and continue. In 21st century also, we were impressed by Tarantino. By we can refer to people like Anurag Kashyap. The essential lessons of neo-violence were learned from American popular cinema. But the problem is that these are intellectual circuit cinemas. What about the popular element in British film or American film? First of all, one has to admit that when cinemas were released in the commercial auditoriums, people having access in English language attended that. Largely the Indians remained unaffected. But there are instances when huge amount of middle class people moved to the hall and saw the films. We can easily name Ben-Hur, we can name Titanic and other things. Why? Because film in India made by the foreigners remained largely inaccessible, not because of language problem. The life pattern and living processes in both parts of the globe, in north and south, are so different that we Indians could not make a direct relationship with the foreign social images. But when something became meaningful in our life, we readily accepted that. Say films like Sound of Music, it got immense popularity in every metropolitan town of India in the 60s. Even Debabrata Biswas, a popular Rabindra Sangeet singer, changed his tune of Tumi to Sei Jabei Chole after seeing Sound of Music, because music is a part of Indian life, and Indians generally feel that foreign films lack songs and music. The same thing happened with Come September tuning. It is so popular that more often than not, it becomes a part of our ringtone. Basically, you feel that songs and music are essential and integral part of Indian life. So films from Hollywood and other parts, when they they incorporated musical intonations, they became popular here. And religious films, say Life of Christ or Ben-Hur and other things, they became popular, not because of their spectacular value, not only because of the famous chariot race in Ben-Hur, but also because of the religious value injected in the film. Because Indians feel a basic commitment to religion, and when they see that Bible or any biblical tale translate these values for them, they get a kind of interest. This is a fact. And then secondly, the intellectual affinity. We generally by foreign film mean Hollywood productions here in India, because the distribution circuit has been so designed that only American films enter this country. Particularly after the 60s, it has become a general rule that in the auditoriums you find American films. But before that, we had several experiences with other directors also. In the late 50s, Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita got its release in the commercial circuit. In the 60s, Antonioni's Blow Up was released in an ordinary cinema auditorium in Kolkata named Jyoti, and there are a number of occasions that in Globe and Tiger, ordinary cinema halls, there people could witness French and Italian movies. Given this perspective, why they felt interested in the foreign films? Some films got immense popularity, others were not. What are the films that got popularity? Gone with the Wind or say Titanic. Why? Because the story element inside that are very important. It's melodramatic and speaks of a national sentiment quite relevant to India, and the individual aspirations and dreams expressed in those cinemas appealed generally to the Indians. There is another genre which attracts the Indians, is the war films, say The Finest Hour, The Longest Journey, Guns of Navarone, etc. Because Second World War was largely inaccessible to India, India got its smell. In Indian freedom struggle, people had some connection with Japanese aggression and other things, but they had no primary sort of contact, and these films made primarily from Hollywood, Tora Tora Tora, or as I have told you, The Finest Hour, gave some access. They opened kind of window to the audience, and we accepted that. But the point is that from 90s, foreign films got a different kind of reception and invitation from the Indian audience. Particularly even in TV, people got stuck with some movies. Say, we can begin with the story with Lion King, animated images which describe life of a jungle. Once upon a time, we had got enough exposure about Tarzan films, a kind of Orientalism initiated by Americans, as if the Sahibs were entrusted with the burden of civilizing Africa, and the Tarzan story enlightened them we got access to Tarzan adventures and we liked them, particularly children. But now animation films and films having CGI effects are getting different kind of interest, because though we dislike and sometimes do not feel comfortable with the American or European way of living, the technology is so attractive that because of sheer technology, we feel attuned to the films that are going on screen. Say Independence Day, Twister, say Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park almost stormed the city like anything, not because of the narrative, but because of the animation effects in its ability to create huge dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs were so sweet, acceptable to the children. So, the Jurassic Park became a kind of myth, modern myth in Indian cinema, and we in India definitely we lack some technological effort and input. We lack finance that way, for which the Hollywood studios, which use this computer effects and which are producing cinemas mainly technologically oriented, where human efforts are minimal, attract the Indian audience. In my opinion, it's almost like going back to the early years of cinema. What was cinema in the beginning? I mean, in the late 19th century or early 20th century. A spectacle, a kind of amazement, a kind of village fair attraction, etc. And now, when you go to cinema, you do not go to attend a human comedy. This is not la comédie humaine. This is an exposure of huge intellectual inputs of technology, this digital making of images, this animation, so on Van Gogh's life or something else, attract us more because these are unavailable in Indian perspective. Say animation. Animation in our country is a particular thing which is weak. Satyajit Ray created animation in Gopi Gain Bagha Bain, in Satranj Ke Khiladi, and Mrinal Sen created it in Bhuvan Som much earlier in 1967. But in both cases, these 2D animations were very indigenous effort and grew out of Satyajit Ray or Mrinal Sen's talent. Those cannot be applied, couldn't be applied every time, everywhere. Popular films that way are absent in India. When we refer to foreign films, these are mainly appealing for the intellectuals, whether it comes from Latin America or from North America, it does not matter. Only some Hollywood films created long time impression, as I have told you, Ben-Hur and films like that. Indian cinema, time and again, have been influenced by European film movements. The most prominent being the case of neorealism. In 1952, after independence, the government of India decided to hold film festivals in major metropolitan cities like Kolkata, Delhi, Madras and Bombay. It is a fateful coincidence that government of India had to depend on certain film societies, and most important of them was Calcutta Film Society, whose general secretary was Satyajit Ray himself. The suggestions were taken, for which a number of films belonging to the famous post-war neorealist movement came to India. To name a few, La Dridi Bicyclette, better known as Bicycle Thieves, made by Vittorio De Sica, Rome Città Aperta, better known as Rome Open City, made by Roberto Rossellini, and The Earth Trembles by Visconti, Latte la Trema. We were given access to have the experience of these films in open guard in open Eden Garden surroundings. The films were shown, and a lot of intellectuals got so energized that Bimal Rai first went to Bombay to make Do Bigha Jameen, where for the first time in the history of Indian cinema, an actor of repute, Balraj Sahni, walked barefoot on the streets of Calcutta to show and portray a landless laborer. Then came Pather Pachali, a real on life location was taken as cinematic material, and there are lots of films. All of them got a kind of initial energy from the neorealist experimentation that cinema should go beyond the studio, should use natural light and location, and can use non-professional actors as basic materials. It influenced every part of India and it changed our cinema a lot. Then we can also name the famous impact of the famous Nouvelle Vague, the New Wave, when Godard and Truffaut were first shown in Calcutta circuit. People noted that Mrinal Sen got so fond of freed shots. He was so magically attached to Truffaut that he inserted unnecessary amount of freed shots in his film Akash Kusum. A rough translation would be daydreaming. So much so that Satyajit publicly wrote against him in the then Statesman Kolkata, and he replied to it. There are altogether 19 letters, a public debate on the use of frozen frames learned from the Nouvelle Vague. And then influence of Godard is known everywhere. This type of jump cut, discontinuity shots, and departure from the linear narrative structure became a norm with Indian cinema right from the 70s. All these people from Shyam Benegal, M.S. Sattu, Kumar Sahni, Moni Kaul and others, they learned heavy lessons of counter cinema from Godard, Truffaut, Ribet and Roemer. Antonioni and Fellini cast their spell in a similar way. Say, in the last sequence of La Dolce Vita, as musical input, Patricia was used, and this Patricia got a quotation, use of like a quotation in Shubhano Rekha in the restaurant sequence. It's a direct quote from La Dolce Vita, Patricia, and we see many movements getting impetus from foreign cinema. Say the birth of independent cinema in India. It has its fundamental root in American cinema, cinemas of Maya Deren and other people, and post-classical Hollywood structure. By classical Hollywood cinema, we mean a period 1917 to 1967. And from the 80s, in America, particularly, independent cinema got a solid foundation, and Indian cinema learnt a lot from those independent productions. Say Norman McLaren and the Canadian film making efforts. Indian documentary got its fundamental shot from Norman McLaren. Even Ritik Ghatak wrote a separate article in praise of his experimental cinemas. And lastly, but most importantly, we should refer to the case of Sergei Eisenstein's battleship Potemkin. The Odessa step sequence became a manual for montage use everywhere in Indian film schools and institutions. And it is because of Sergei Eisenstein and it is because of Murnau and German expressionist cinema that Indian cinema could make some deviations from the usual procedure of presenting a narrative. I can give you a specific example. Pather Pachali generally is a cinema about which people say that it got a catalytic agent in Bicycle Thieves, but in my humble view, it did not receive its primary impetus from Bicycle Thieves. Rather, we should name Jean Renoir. His use of light and soft focus in La Règle du Jeu, Rules of the Game, or say A Day in the Country, influenced Satyajit very much. And we know when Renoir came to Calcutta in connection with the making of River, Satyajit volunteered to help him. And during holiday touring with Renoir, he was taught how the morning light, even though it is a low light thing, differs from the evening light, and he applied it in the making of Aparajito. This type of things should be remembered in Satyajit Ray's centenary year. And in Pather Pachali, you would see a situation when he created a brilliant chiaroscuro of the old aunt telling the young Durga a fairy tale. If you look at the shadow and light position, it would remind you of the Ivan the Terrible made by Eisenstein. And Satyajit Ray, in his own writings, admitted that he was so heavily influenced by seeing Ivan the Terrible that he got a nightmare, and he paid his tribute in the Pather Pachali. Now is the time to recognize all these moments. And if you consider 1962 Film Festival in Delhi, you would see Tarkovsky was first recognized by another Indian filmmaker. Ritwik Ghatak, in his report about second film festival, wrote an article in which he pointed out that it is the second phase of Indian cinema, of Russian cinema, when we are getting Even the Childhood, a unique film made by almost an unknown Soviet filmmaker called Andrei Tarkovsky. And Tarkovsky from the 80s, through his use of long takes, created havoc with Indian filmmakers, particularly avant-garde filmmakers. These are points which should be remembered when we talk about the impact of foreign films. The impact of foreign films should be measured not in terms of its popular reception, but as an intellectual linkage between two parts of the globe.